You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.
And welcome to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community. I am your host, Ben Wolf. I want to introduce our guest today who is going to teach about how to go solo as an executive, and ask you all at this moment before we get started to pause this for a second. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, whatever the platform that you're listening to or watching this on allows you to do. Please do that. It definitely helps give more people access and the benefit of what we are sharing here. And with that, I want to get into introducing our guest today, who is a former chemical engineer and executive. He now helps consultants, coaches, and professional service business owners learn how to be more successful as entrepreneurs themselves. He's the host of the popular podcasts, Smashing the Plateau and Going Solo. You could find out more about him and what he does in those two podcasts at smashingtheplateau.com. And with that, I give you David Shriner-Cahn. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thanks for inviting me.
My absolute pleasure. So let's just jump right in with what I usually start off with people, which is please give us some context. How did you get into this? What's a quick 2-minute background on where you came from and how you came to be, doing the kind of work that you're doing now, we're going to be talking about today.
And you sort of alluded to it in your introduction. So yeah, I graduated from Cornell with a master's in chemical engineering a long time ago, worked as an engineer for a few years, got fired from my second job right after getting a very strong performance review and a nice raise, because the company I worked for had lost a lot of business. Did some soul searching, ended up going into the not-for-profit space. I was an executive in that sector for well over 20 years, and wanted more control over my life and more control over what I did, etc. Then became a consultant. My transition also was triggered by, although I wanted to become a consultant, had thought about it for a long time, the actual trigger was also job termination. And again, it was not performance related. It was just redundancy. There was some change a layer above me and redundancy with my skills. So I sort of saw it coming. Anyway, I became a consultant, and my business over the last 15 years has, pushed me in the direction of helping others like me make the transition. So over the last 15 years, more and more of the kinds of people that have asked me for help with their businesses have been consultants. And now we serve them in individually and in a community of like-minded folks to help them make the transition after a long career as an employee and developing deep expertise in their field, help them leverage that expertise and run the kind of business that suits who they are and what they want for their lives as a consultant.
Right. That is super interesting. And one of the things you say on your website about your Going Solo podcast is their quote, to help highly skilled professionals build their own business following a late career job loss. So are you, and I know that probably resonates from your background based on what the story you just told, is your target market for this, I guess, for the podcast and for the work that you're doing and for your mission, truly focused on those, your target market truly focused on those people who have undergone a late career job loss?
Yes, it is. And in fact, one of the things I discovered, I was podcasting for a long time. I started Smashing the Plateau in 2014 and decided to kind of test the waters with a narrower focus with Going Solo, which I launched in 2019, specifically to focus on those that have made the transition when there is a job loss. And one of the things I discovered is many of the consultants who were very successful that I'd known for a long time actually started their business when they got pushed out of their jobs. And the interesting thing that I learned over the last couple of years since I started Going Solo is that there's a lot of shame associated with job loss. And so particularly people that are highly skilled, high achievers, they will not generally, unless prompted, they're not voluntarily going to share the fact that they started a consulting business because they got pushed out of their job.
Right. Yeah, that is so true. And I don't know that just to be vulnerable here for a second, I don't know that I've mentioned it ever on this podcast before, but but the same thing applies to me. I don't know if I don't know if I would call it late career, mid career, maybe, but I really am where I am, and I'm doing what I'm doing because of a series of events and a series of evolutions that took place in my life following a job loss, being laid off at one of the top law firms in Manhattan after being there for 5 years because our department and myself in particular had low hours for a couple of years straight, and finally a few of us got let go, mid-level and senior level associates, and so definitely relate to that. I relate to what you said about shame, and how sometimes we don't end up getting to the next level because it's too hard to be brave enough to make a change and take risk until we're forced to take the risk.
Exactly. And right. And in your situation, Ben, it doesn't mean that you were a bad lawyer.
I tried to be good.
Right. But so when you're in a law firm, there's sort of two aspects of it. One is you actually have to practice the law well and produce good results for clients. The other piece is you have to acquire clients. And so there's
I was not a rainmaker in the firm.
Yeah, exactly. And I have this conversation with people all the time. I actually was in one of our groups, we just had this discussion this morning about the fact that there are people who are really good at marketing and sales, and they're kind of shallow on expertise. And then there are people that are really good in expertise, but a little shallow in marketing and sales.
Right.
And those that we all know about and we see, and particularly those of us who focus on quality, the people that we recognize are the ones that generally have some combination of both. That they're good experts and they're also good at getting the word out about themselves.
Right. I mean, what I find very often for the people who want to go solo, and as you know, and the people listening to this or watching this podcast know that I'm very focused on the world of fractional leadership. And obviously I have a book, that those on the video can see here, that just came out about a month ago, and focused on fractional leadership, focused on people who are either solo or as members of firms providing fractional, non-full-time, part-time, executive level support to businesses. So a subcategory of the type of people you work with. And so it's not regular consulting, but it's that people are maybe they're good at being a sales manager of teams, not necessarily good at selling themselves, or they're good at being a CTO or a COO and managing operations and people. But again, they're not, that doesn't mean they get one with the capacity to do well the sales of themselves. And therefore, you can't put bread on the table if all you are is good at being a CTO or a CFO or a COO, but you can't get business.
Right. Essentially, you're a technician. You're not necessarily running a business.
Right. Well, maybe that's a good transition into the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is, you have this podcast, you have this community. Before we get to that, what are the problems? What are people missing and lacking that either have gone solo, want to go solo, switching from full-time? What have you been seeing? Obviously that led you to create all these resources, but before those resources got created, what are people lacking? What are people missing?
What are
their problems?
So I'll give you some examples, and I can talk about what some of the problems are that are emblematic in these examples. So Philip Van Dusen, who is a friend of mine and has been a guest on both my shows, Smashing the Plateau and Going Solo, he was an executive building up big brands, executive in major corporations, and he got burned out. And he found that even though he was really good at what he did, he had very little control, even as an executive. And it got to the point where he actually voluntarily left because he was burnt out. He spent an initial amount of time doing some self-reflection to try to plan his sort of the next phase of his career. And what he did was he ended up founding his own brand strategy company, where he actually got to work with the kinds of people he wanted to work with, and focus his time and energy on really using his expertise in a positive way. So the issue in Philip's case was that there was a misalignment, personal misalignment with like what he was doing in his executive role, and he was feeling the personal, and I would say probably health consequences of being burnt out. Second example is Laura Rotter, who is a guest on Going Solo, had a very successful, lucrative career on Wall Street, managing other people's money, and realized that the question of what is enough was really eating at her, and earning lots of money wasn't quite doing it, and so she ended up going into her own business, which she also, I don't know, I'm not sure whether we talked about this on the podcast or not. I wonder whether she would have done it voluntarily. She also got pushed out, but now she's doing a great job helping individuals manage their money, and particularly helping those that are in, I would say, primarily mid to late career stage issues with, how am I going to figure out, kind of like, what Laura did, how am I going to figure out what's enough? If I've been a high achiever and a high earner, but I really want to change how I live my life, and I want to make sure I have enough money to do that. How do I put all those pieces together? And Laura has the expertise both on the, I would say, sort of the spiritual dimension of kind of figuring out what's enough, and then she has the technical expertise to know, okay, here we can actually look at your money story and figure out what do you actually need, and how do we actually do this, and how do we pull it off.
So I mean, look, so those kinds of things like burnout, like not being satisfied anymore, like being pushed out, which is maybe after the burnout and everything, and ends up being finally the push. But then after people go solo, or if they want to go solo, but they're not sure how to do it, like what are the problems that they're facing in successfully even being able to do that, or doing it, but then not necessarily taking off?
Yeah. So essentially they need to figure out the following. Like, what is it you love to do? What is it you're most competent at doing? Who do you feel compelled to serve? What do they need? What do they want? What do they have the capacity to pay for? And what are they willing to pay for? And you put all those pieces together, and they actually all have to be in sync.
Right.
If you're missing one, it's not going to work well.
It's like an 8-part puzzle, but you have to have all.
It is a puzzle.
Parts.
It's a puzzle. Right. And honestly, it's not so simple to answer all those questions, particularly if you've been a cog in somebody else's wheel. You have been forced not to ask all those questions. Right. So you're not, like, your mind is not there. And especially if you've been, doing what you've been doing and doing it well, and you've been in a high pressure job, your calendar's always been full, your inbox is always full. You don't really have the time and space to really think about this and do deep reflection, self-reflection. So you actually need some time and space to be able to think these things through. And what I've seen when people like this first start out on their own, it takes some time to put all the pieces together. And even when they start to put the pieces together, they don't always come up with the best business model, as an example. So I'll give you an example of someone who's in our community, and I will call her Sally. She has a very time-consuming consulting business that is the income comes primarily from very customized consulting work and paid speaking. and the marketing part is actually very time consuming, because when you're trying to create custom proposals for clients, it takes a long time to sort of build the relationships, customize the proposals, and actually get them sold. So the lead cycle is very long.
Right.
And one of the things
and what you end up charging has to build in the cost of the gigs you didn't get, the cost of preparing for the whole thing.
Right. And there are other models you can use that can also utilize your expertise and help people that are a little less, I would say, less stressful. So one of the things we've been working on is how to build kind of a learning community model where people are paying kind of an ongoing subscription to be part of it. Mm-hmm. And it's a very different sales cycle, right? So that's the kind of shift that is taking place over time. And one of the benefits of being in community is you hear from others about where your business model may be causing you some stress, and where are some places that you might be able to provide some relief. And honestly, like in Sally's case, this business model is something that she was thinking she wasn't going to be ready to do for like another 20 years. But she's doing it now because she's getting support to kind of put the pieces together. Another example is Tom, who works with thought leaders. So it's a B2B business model, but the sales is really like there are individuals who are buying it. So I would say it's kind of a B2C kind of sales mentality. Mm-hmm. And again, his model involved very long sales cycles. There mm-hmm. were decreasing conversions because of some changes in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And what he hadn't thought about, but now has started to do, is to create an entry-level package that's much lower priced, but still very profitable. And essentially, it utilizes time that he was giving away for free to give people some initial advice that's actually very valuable to them and saves them a lot of money, because they end up going down as thought leaders. You need to invest a lot of money in kind of things around building your brand, building your platform, mm-hmm. getting your thoughts out, whether it's in writing or speaking or whatever. But you can go down rabbit holes and spend a lot of money trying to build your platform in ways that are just not constructive. And so he's actually, his sort of entry-level package that he's now charging for is something he would give away as kind of trying to get people in the door for a much longer, higher cost relationship. But that package is saving them a lot of money on things they were thinking about spending their money on in other services that Tom doesn't provide. So again, it's a shift in thinking, it's a shift in the business model, and it's tapping into ways that he can use his expertise that he wasn't currently doing.
Right. Well, so one great example you're giving of how people can fill in what they're missing and what they're lacking in terms of putting together, getting clarity on those 8 pieces. And then there's also the whole problem of executing on that. Even once you know what your business model is and what you should be doing, you still have to get the business. And
correct.
And so you have the problem of getting the business, getting clarity on those 8 things. You mentioned this tool of this independent, like-minded membership community that you have. So tell me more about that community. Like, why did you create that? How does it work? What is it?
So one of the things that I have learned about myself over the course of my career, including the 28 years when I was an employee and the 15 years as an entrepreneur, is I personally have gravitated towards being involved in communities with like-minded people. So when I was an employee, I would either informally or formally want to be with other people that were dealing with the similar kinds of issues, whether it was in formal associations or informal gatherings or whatever. And that would always help me particularly solve problems where either I didn't have the expertise to solve the problems, so it would be great to hear something from somebody else who had a similar experience, or maybe to learn about resources that I didn't know about. And also, when I was unsure of something, other people would give me either feedback that what I was thinking about doing really didn't make any sense, so I wouldn't waste my time or money, or the organization's money. And they would also give me encouragement if I was unsure about doing something, that, yeah, this makes sense to try, get started on it. And also when you're in groups like that, if you say you're going to do something, the next time you're with them, they're going to want to hear how you did. So it's kind of right. So, the accountability thing is kind of weird, because like, why do I need somebody else to tell me what I have to do when I'm the one who's actually saying I need to do this? The reality is, when we tell ourselves,
I would never ask that question. I fully understand why I need accountability.
Yeah, because like if we know we need to do something, but there's some element of fear associated with it, the element of fear means we're stepping outside our comfort zone, which means we're probably going into an area where if we do well, we will grow. So we actually have to, the fear is actually a good sign that we're probably going to invest our time and or money in something useful. But the fear also causes us to be reluctant to take the step. If we tell ourselves we need to take the step, nobody's going to come back and tell you, well, why didn't you do it? You said you're going to do it this week. Why didn't you do it? So you won't be embarrassed if you just tell yourself. If you tell one other person, you're more likely to follow through if you're going to see that person again. And if you tell a group of people, you're even more likely to do it, because you don't want to have the same conversation with a group of people every single week. It's like, well, why didn't I make this, why didn't I make this difficult call with a client? Or why didn't I follow up with this prospect? Or why didn't I, try this different pricing model? So so the accountability is actually really important, and that it does work well when you're in a space with trusted colleagues.
Right. No, it's a great point. Actually reminds me of this famous story from 50 years ago with this famous rabbi, Rabbi Dessler. And he at one point, so, he smoked like many people in those days, and he decided he was going to quit smoking. And all the people who came to him to ask questions or whatever, like there was one particular day, he told everybody he met with, I quit smoking. Like he told it wasn't like a group, but he told all these people, students, like, people who looked up to him, that I quit smoking. Somebody asked him, what are you trying to show off? Like, why are you telling everybody you quit smoking? He's like, because even I don't know 100% about myself that I'll be able to stick to it. But I know that I do have, and one of my vices is, like anybody, I have a sense of pride. And if I know that all these people who look up to me know that I quit smoking, then I'm going to be very embarrassed. Besides the commitment I made to myself and the commitment to my health to quit smoking, if I know that I'm going to be embarrassed in front of all these people, if they would see me smoking again, then that's gonna like solidify my commitment to doing, the hard thing, which I've committed to do. It just reminds me of that. And people can find out about that membership community for people who have gone solo, are going solo, went solo at smashingtheplateau.com.
Yes. Okay. And specifically, if you want to learn more about the community, smashingtheplateau.com/community.
Okay, awesome. Again, so what made you decide to start these two podcasts, or like what is your goal, I guess, with particularly going solo? What's its mission?
The mission is to share stories of people who have gone solo. And in particular, one of the things I don't see a lot of out there is talking about the emotional turmoil that happens when you go solo. Even if you leave your job voluntarily, there's a huge shift. When you first start a consulting business, it's like our identity is very tied up, especially in America, for kind of high profile professionals, our identity is really tied up into what we get paid to do. So it's like, I'm David, I'm a vice president in such and such at such and such company, as opposed to I'm David, I help professionals make a living as a consultant when they've been pushed out of their job. Right. It's very different.
Right. If you could say KPMG, some kind of big brand name, that's a big part of your self-worth.
Exactly. Right. And so my kind of status and ego is tied to KPMG. It's not tied to who I am as an individual and as an expert in my field.
That's scary.
And when you first start your consulting business, you have no track record doing it.
Right.
So, as opposed to, I have 25 years of doing this for KPMG, which is a great track record. So it's so there, and then if you've been pushed out, even more so, there's shame, there's fear, there's grief, there's trauma. I've had guests who've talked about feeling traumatized by what has happened to them, and they don't know who to talk to about it. There are all kinds of issues. So going solo, I really like to share stories of people that have gone through this and talk about, what did it feel like? What did it feel like
Right.
the first day you were unemployed? What did you do? Who did you talk to? How did you deal with the grieving process of losing a job? I don't hear these kinds of things being shared much. So I think that's really important for people to hear. And I know the feedback that I get from the audience is, it's really great to hear, so-and-so's story about what happened to them. And in particular, when we have people on that maybe they're a year or 2 or 3 years into their consulting business, how they're making money, not necessarily how much they're making, but what are they actually doing that's working? So, basic storytelling is an individual has a setback. There's some turmoil associated with the setback. And then how do they overcome the setback?
Right.
And as humans, we relate to these stories.
Right.
And we realize, so-and-so can do it. I can do it too.
Right. Right. And I suppose that hearing, even just hearing about the turmoil, hearing about the trauma, the fear that people went through or are going through, that it makes people feel less isolated, because there is that shame with, or that lack of self-worth that you're dealing with, and to say like, oh wait, this is normal. This is a mountain which is scalable. This is a challenge, but it's not going to be forever. And
it's not going to be forever, particularly if you do something about it. And the other thing is, people need to realize, if you're over the age of 50 in America, you have more than a 50% likelihood that you are going to be fired at some point.
That's a great point to tell people. So like, look, you could either get ahead of this, or you could wait for it to get ahead of you.
It's exactly. It's like, why do we have fire drills? So that when there's a fire, we don't have to think about what to do. So same thing with your career. You need to do scenario planning and know
the fire drill. What happens when you get fired?
Right. If we're employed, what are we going to do if the other party decides that the employment story is over?
Right.
And the same thing when you're in business. What are you going to do if a client says, we don't need your services anymore?
Right. Well, look, that's what I tell people. People ask, when I'm talking about fractional leadership all over the place. So people ask, what, isn't that so much more risky? Because now you have to get clients, and then there's a certain turnover, so you have to continue getting clients over time. Isn't that more risky than being a full-time employee, where you get a set paycheck every 2 weeks or whatever? And so I tell people that, in a certain sense, yes. But in another sense, all of your eggs are in one basket. If you lose, you essentially have one client from whom you get all of your revenue if you're a full-time employee. And so if you lose that one client, all your eggs in one basket, you go from 100% income to 0% income in one day. That's why the need for the fire drill, which I love that term because it has the double meaning. If you are fractional leader, fractional executive, or you go independent and consultant or whatever, at the beginning, yes, there is a higher level of risk at the very beginning, because you start off with 0 clients, or even 1 or 2 clients. It may not be enough for what you need. So that is the toughest period, and how to navigate that transition. But
yeah, and by the way, I would say it's not necessarily the highest level of risk at the beginning. It's just you're going to need to be able to provide cash flow if you want to maintain your lifestyle.
Right. Well, that's the risk. How are you going to stay in your home? How are you going to pay your bills? How are you going to live and not go insane? And how long is it going to take? And you don't know how long it's going to take until you have the clients.
Right.
But once you cross that bridge, Then you have diversified risk. You have multiple clients. So you lose one. Okay, I only lost a portion of my income, and you could work on making it up. And hopefully by that point, you have a little bit of a deal flow going on, and and some things in the pipeline that you could go to, and a little bit more of a reputation for doing that. In terms of one advice that I see a lot of people doing to cross that bridge, even though it's kind of stressful at the beginning when they know they want to make the move, is to first start putting yourself out there, maybe somewhat subtly with a little bit of tact, as doing whatever it is that you want to do as a consultant or as a fractional executive or whatever, and do it as one side hustle. And that's very busy because now you're doing it on top of a full-time job. And then look for your second gig. And when you get the second gig, then give your notice. So when you start the second gig, you're already starting off with 2 clients at least. So you have somewhat of as an approach. It's kind of stressful. There's a lot going on at the end, but at least it creates a bridge. Although
that's actually good advice. And I actually have 2 very tactical things you could do that are low risk, that you can do if you're still employed, but you're thinking that you may want to go solo as your next move. One is you can spend time developing the network that you're going to need to run a successful consulting business, because it's probably going to be a different network than you currently have. And that you can do over time. It's just developing the relationships and maintaining them. The second one, which is a very practical one, is if you can apply, if you don't have one already, apply for a line of credit, because it's way easier to get when you have a paycheck. Because traditional lenders will lend to you when you have a paycheck. When you first open the doors of a new business, they will not want to talk to you.
Right. Awesome. That is great advice. And again, for more great advice, for more research, for more ability to listen to people who have gone through this, check out Going Solo, David Shriner-Cahn's podcast, smashingtheplateau.com. You can find out more about that, as well as his other podcasts, smashingtheplateau.com/community, or just through the site in general. You can find out about the membership community for people who have gone solo, can get to be part of that community through that link. And really appreciate all the great information and stories that you shared today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, and we'll see everybody else on the other side.
You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.